Uh, hey everyone, thanks for joining. Welcome to another Future of Work talk. So, these talks, as I'm sure you'll know, are focused on exploring fun topics and concepts around the future of how organizations of all shapes and sizes will be structured, future capitalism, future democracy, and that kind of thing. I'd like to introduce Sam Schikowitz. Sam is a doctor and a serial entrepreneur who got really into the space of designing not just what an organization does, but how it does what it does. So from sense making to governance. And so a couple of years ago, Sam founded a platform called ForBy, or ForBy, maybe, for people by people. Um, the platform's called and product's called ForBy, and it's a platform which aims to support better sense making, decision making, and governance within all sorts of groups. So, Sam, I know you. I guess by way of context, Sam has also been like a strong figure in the emo leaders group, helping to kind of share his perspective and advice around various kind of forum governance processes and the financial model and all kinds of other fun parts of the work that we've been doing in forum over the years. So, Sam, thank you so much for being part of Quorum One and for
Happy to be here. Thank you.
this talk today. Well,
Yeah, thank you.
cool. So, I guess to start us off, how exactly how exactly did you get into governance and I guess democratic collaborative decision making in the first place? I mean, you started off as a doctor, then
Yeah,
you're an entrepreneur. Like where exactly did that pivot point
yeah.
lead you? Yeah.
Well, so, very early, like around 2003, I was in these discussions with my uncle, who's a super geek, and we were kind of just envisioning sort of a direct democracy platform. And we spent a lot of time together kind of doing that. And I was just opening my practice and, kind of the times were very busy and it was a difficult time for me and it kind of fell by the wayside. But, years later, I ended up uh, building businesses and some of those were pretty tech heavy. And and a few of them kind of took off. And so uh, I found myself with a lot more time and resources. And so I was building software for another business, another sort of vision that I had, and COVID kind of shut the whole thing down. And I was just sitting there, kind of going, "Okay, what am I supposed to do here?" And I found myself listening to a lot of Daniel Schmachtenberger videos and meditating, and it kind of brought me back to this idea that the biggest problem that we face, I mean, we're facing a lot of problems. We're facing environmental collapse, including, soil degradation and climate change and plastics and, toxic chemicals. And we're facing economic crises and, like social crises, including like wars and, social upheavals. And, there's some risks with artificial intelligence and some risks with synthetic biology. That's one that I've really been digging into over the years. I was working with Daniel Schmachtenberger for a while on that, researching that with him. And so there are a bunch of problems, big problems, and they're all kind of joining together, with AI making it easier to make synthetic biological weapons and just it all kind of is running together. And the way I see it, and I think people who, think about it a lot also sort of tend to voice this opinion, which is that we sort of have solutions to all these problems, but the thing that holds us back is that we don't have the solution to the sense making and decision making process. Like we can't actually implement any solutions. We can't actually solve any of these problems because we don't have problem solving solutions that work given our how many billion of us there are and the complexity of the problems we're facing. So I mean, if you think about governance, and sorry to, I can just talk about this, but this is what got me going on it. And if you think about our like markets as a problem solving tool, that solve the problem of goods and services. What do people need, and how do they get them? And and you think about government or governance as a problem-solving tool, like how do we prevent people from taking each other's kidneys and and selling them on the market, and all that kind of stuff, or totally destroying the environment or whatever.
Yeah.
So these are problem-solving tools that we have, or technology that we have. But and government is super important, but it was the governments that we have were sort of invented at a time when somebody in a village, a group, all the members of a village would get into a town hall, and they would talk about what they thought the country should do, and they wrote down what they wanted to do regarding taxation and war and whatever on a piece of paper, and they gave it to some dude, and he, usually almost always a dude, and he took it with his horse to the capital and brought the paper to the capital. And like that's the that's how representation evolved, right? And like we're just at the stage where it's like you have like literally 1 million people being represented by one person in California. Like you can't really represent 3 people,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. That reminds me of kind of how I got into this in the first place as well, which was a friend, well, at that time an acquaintance, and now a friend, many years ago. I think it was back in like 2008 or something. During that presidential election, I think I was complaining about something about campaign finance reform or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And he asked me, Hank, why do we need a president? And I was like, well, and then I got a little bit stuck. He was like, why do we need a Congress? And he's like, if we were to redesign, all of the democratic systems that we use to run every aspect of our society, of humanity writ large, from the ground up, using all the tools that we have today, would it be anything like what we have now?
Probably not
Right?
much. I mean, there are some tools. I mean, there's some universal structure, right? Of like, hey, everybody has different opinions, and we have to kind of coalesce on the best ideas, right? A lot of people have a lot of ideas and opinions, and we have to find a way to have the best ideas rise to the top. And when you're below 150 people, you can kind of hash things out in a room. But above that number, you got to start using technology, more advanced technology. And that's why I'm building a computer thing, right? Because we need network computers, right? To coordinate at the level of billions, you need really, really smart network computers and really good AI.
Let's talk about that.
Good UI. Excuse me.
Totally. Yeah. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about ForBy. So what is ForBy exactly?
So I struggle trying to define it, but at the core of it is that it's a sense making and decision making tool for groups of all sizes. So if you think even like a million years ago, or a couple of 100,000, 20,000, 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, groups of people, villages and tribes, and they had to make some decisions together, but they were pretty simple decisions. Like a nomadic tribe, should we go up the river or down the river? Or do we cross the river? It wasn't like, and everybody kind of knew the same thing. But nowadays, even just a family of like 5 or 10 people has to make decisions that they're unqualified to make, like decisions about the advanced healthcare of an elderly relative, or like complicated decisions about renovations and different. There's just a lot of like decisions that we have to make. And we get by, but it would be much easier if there was what I call this dialectical scaffolding. So if there was a way for people to be able to kind of place the argumentarium, like place all of the ideas into a very visible scaffold, and allow each of those ideas to be kind of dissected and examined and rated. Like people will tell you their opinion all day long, right? But you don't really know how a group feels. You can ask this person and ask that person and get a sense, but you don't really know how strongly they feel unless you like get them to interface with something to kind of rate each of their opinion on a large group of ideas, a large section of ideas. So this is just a way of like really collecting and smartly allowing people to rate and interact with the ideas of the members of the group. So
that's cool. So what type of groups do you think are most or will be most able to make use of ForBy? I know ForBy is a working thing now. It's been out for a while, but it's kind of the current version is much more like a beta. You've been working on a bigger release for a while, which I've seen some screenshots and stuff of, and is like
Yeah.
super freaking awesome. There's for folks who are interested in quorum, there is a presentation we did a while back over in the emo leaders. There's a recording and stuff. You can kind of see some shots of that. But going into this next version of ForBy,
Yeah.
what types of groups do you think are kind of most set up for success? If you want to make use of.
Yeah, I think any group that has a sort of commitment to democratic process. So any group that believes that, everyone should be able to pipe in and that the best ideas will probably rise to the top, given the wisdom of a larger group of people, like, spreading the power in a sense, or the ability to speak and to weigh in on decisions, spreading that as widely as you can will likely produce better results. If you believe that, then ForBy is probably for you. And so I'm thinking like the most likely candidates are any associations that have democratic process, any businesses that are cooperative or democratic, that have cooperative or democratic sort of leanings. But even just groups or businesses that want to gather ideas from a large group of people. It's not that you have to use ForBy to make the decisions, but you can use it to kind of pull or pull ideas from a group of people, and then people who have more at stake or more empowered, like owners or whatever, can choose from those ideas and decide what moves to the next level. But there's a lot of people who could use it, I think.
Yeah, that's I absolutely, and I know quorum is we're interested in and helping to pilot it as well. I think we definitely fit neatly into those categories that you laid out.
Yeah.
So you use the word, so it's interesting because when I think of taking a tool to help facilitate the broader aspect of governance and decision making, I often get kind of and I think a lot of folks might think of like voting and voting structures. However, when you talk about this space, you use the word sense making a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's a really key thing.
Yeah.
This idea of decisions don't emerge from a vacuum, right? They emerge from a sense of logic and reason that we each have. And so I wonder if you could kind of pull that apart for us. So what is sense making exactly in your view? And
Yeah.
how does it happen exactly?
Yeah, so there's a whole body of study around this, and we just got a great question that I'll get back to. But the way we're working with sense making right now is there's a couple of really simple ways. It's when there's a vote or like a decision to be made. When you vote, you're given the opportunity to give a reason, so why you voted in favor or against. And you can add other reasons as well. So if you're in favor and you vote in favor and you give a reason why you're in favor, and you can give a reason why you might be against as well, or whatever. And so all of these are neutral, and all of those decisions go into another poll that's connected with the thing itself. And so when you're looking at that proposal, and you can easily see all of the reasons for or against, and you can upvote those. And so you can start to see kind of what matters to the community, and use that information to create a better proposal, perhaps. And so similarly, like people will often want to add evidence or like information, websites or documents or videos or whatever. And so with each decision, there's what we call the link file poll, which includes all of those those things. And normally in a proposal or in a bill or a document or something, you just have a list of those. But what we do, like these are related documents or something, what we do is we have that list as an actual poll. So now people can prioritize which piece of evidence or whatever they feel is better, and you can so you can kind of get a sense of what the group believes, and maybe if you feel like some piece of evidence is missing, or you can provide some comment on the quality of a piece of evidence or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those are sense-making tools. There's one more that we're hoping to build, and it's kind of right after the beta, and that's actually a sense-making poll. I don't know if anyone here has heard of poll lists, but it's the idea that you create a poll and you start with these seed comments, and you have people rate those comments and add comments that they feel are related but haven't been said yet. And so it goes through the cycles of people sort of saying how they feel about these comments, about these positions, basically.
Yeah.
And so what happens is there's some analysis done, and you start to see different sections of thinking, like different groups, like polarized groups, or like the good example was the people in Taiwan with bringing Uber into Taiwan. They used Polis, and so you could see that in the answers to the questions there were like the existing taxi drivers and people who wanted to use Uber, and legislators who were concerned about the taxation issues, and so you could see this, and then you started to see it analyzes and looks for statements that have unlikely alliances. So it looks for things that people agree with that you wouldn't think that people in different camps would agree on. So you start to yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just I mean, because it's like I think it's really interesting to think about different forms of sense making. One, when you're thinking about almost more like what we might think of as like political positions, like within a group, things which are kind of more opinion and perspective based. I think there's this other whole. I mean, there's many different categories, right? That ways you could slice and dice different aspects of shared reality, but I know in a lot of organizations, there can be disagreements, I suppose, or competing potential courses of action based not on perspective or like opinion or really even anything that's political, but more just based on differing potential interpretations of evidence, right? And so I think a lot of when I think of sense making within a lot of like modern organizations, I think of a lot of interpreting data, like taking data that's flowing and then putting together analyses and reports sitting on top of those, and then essentially testing hypotheses, saying, well, look, like what we think's is happening here is that when we do X or Y, that results in Z or A or whatever. And then saying, well, if that were true, then if we did this over here, and so we're designing these tests and these experiments, are looking for examples of natural experiments. And so I wonder if so I think there's two potential questions in there for you. One is like, how do you think of that aspect of kind of data-driven decision-making when it comes to collaborative sense-making, particularly in a more distributed way, a less hierarchical way? And then the other aspect is, what about that other aspect of not just like, should we do this? Like, so the very kind of easy to encapsulate questions, but of these areas where you have entire rational trees of logic, right, that develop up and like, look, if you believe this to be true, then you would also believe this or that to be true. And if we look, this is just not supported by evidence. And so if you're building, those kind of interrelated I guess suppositions. Yeah, so I guess that's what I would throw.
Well, let me answer the second one first, because I don't have as good of an answer for it, and I want to talk more about the first one. So let me get that one out of the way, which is that and I love that topic, and there are people who are really chasing that tree. I mean, you look at chasing that, climbing that tree, whatever you want to call it. There's like software like Kialo, and there's this society library, and so and then the community notes, like in Twitter, where people are trying to like really find whether a given statement has validity or not, and kind of like bring clarity to to that question of like, is this a good statement or not? That like this little tiny part of this giant logical tree, like, is that even good? And so I'm following that, and I'm looking for ways to integrate that into the thing that I'm building, but we're still kind of early days. So eventually I think we'll get there, where there'll be sort of like a community notes or a commentary system that can be overlaying other statements or positions or polls or questions or challenges or proposals or whatever. So excuse me. There's so many branches there.
That's one area, right? That area of interrelated suppositions. What about that area of data-driven decision making? Like,
Yep. So I love that, and I think about Ray Dalio's group, the Bridgewater Associates, and they they really they have a decision making process where they really use a lot of just data driven decision making, and they also empower people with expertise. So they will sort of delegate to people who are experts in the field, or they'll give their vote sort of more weight. And this kind of comes back to the question by Esteban, which is crowdsourcing and the wisdom of groups are great mechanisms, but making just people
Yeah,
who aren't
I
qualified.
can speak that out loud. I'm happy to speak that out
Yeah,
loud. So
yeah,
it does bring it. I was kind of hoping we would
yeah,
kind of go in that direction. So
yeah, yeah,
as Devin brings forward a question, crowdsourcing and the wisdom of the groups are great mechanisms. But to your point, Sam, about making decisions that one isn't qualified to make, right? How do you reduce the noise within group dynamics, or perhaps amplify voices or opinions of those with domain expertise? Or do you do that at all, right? Or maybe
yeah.
it's not like a bad thing to attempt to do in your.
Yeah, so I think it's actually super important to do that, and just to reduce the cognitive load. Like there are problems that a complex organization will face that most of the people just won't have the expertise to address, and so we're actually at our core a liquid democracy software. And so what that means is the way we're interpreting that is that an organization can set up areas of expertise, and in our public forum, like in our Twitter type, worldwide or nationwide forums, there will be a set of we call them expertise tags, but like domains and subdomains. But an organization can set those up, and then people can. There's a couple of levels of qualification, so people can qualify themselves as experts on digital marketing, or HR, or whatever the Python development or whatever it is, and so that you can self-qualify. And then I think in the later versions, we will have a third-party system where you can, pay $50 or something and get third-party verified with your education and your work experience. So someone will call all your, references and, et cetera. And so then you instead of being like a first-tier expert, you'll be like a second-tier or third-tier, depending on, how much time and expertise you actually have in those fields. And so then you can go through a large comment tree and filter by expertise tags. So you can kind of see what experts in Django have to say about this particular problem that we're facing, or cybersecurity, or economics, or macroeconomics, or there'll be lots of subcategories, so you can really drill down. So there's that, and then you can delegate to any member in the network. So the idea is, like with Quarb1, I don't even know how many people there are. There's a lot, hundreds, maybe more, but
I think we're at 215 at last count, but we'll be much bigger soon, likely.
Okay. So the idea here is that you can find people in the network who are experts on the problem, on that particular tag, on that particular expertise tag, and say, and then you can kind of like query them, or find what their positions are and see if they're in alignment, and see if you really trust them. And then if so, you can just say, okay, anytime there's a like a proposal or a challenge, or anything that has to do with that particular area of expertise, I'm just going to automate the delegation to that person because I trust them to know more than I do. And so that's one of these properties of liquid democracies that have been studied, is that people do tend to delegate to people with more expertise than they have in areas. So
let's delve into that like one tick down, right? So I think when folks get into this process of trying to actually build, okay, I will say my own bias, and I think the bias of many folks within Core1 is kind of this business operations bias of like trying to create really smooth, scalable, human-centric workflows.
yeah.
Like modern organizations have all sorts of really built on the backs of really good operational workflows.
Yeah.
So when for many folks who are have like tried to bite off the task of designing like smooth operational flows around expertise-based co-governance, I think one of you quickly run into some issues of how do you define even what types of expertise can be had, right?
Yeah.
And so if a question comes up, how do you know like which which
Right.
expertise tags get applied to it, who's the boss of, who gets to decide that part, who defines that taxonomy in the first place,
Right.
who is in charge of like deciding which parts of the taxonomy are relevant to which specific questions, and then within each one of those, ultimately, like who's the arbiter of, what if people have completely differing opinions of what it means to be an expert in that particular area. So how do you tackle those kinds of problems?
Yeah. I mean, we have the ways that we're going to tackle them, and I don't know that any ways are going to be perfect, but so the community will set that tree, that expertise tag tree, and so and there's like a collaborative or deliberative process of finding how that tree works. And then right now, how it works is that people like when you create a proposal, you yourself decide what tags will be associated with it. And I think at some point it will be a poll, and so there will be a limited number of tags because of our limited cognitive capacity, and people will say, I think this tag or I think that tag, and the voting, whatever most people agree are the most important tags will then will be the ones that are applied dynamically to any given proposal or poll or in decision or anything. So but ultimately what it comes down to is the reason you have the tagging is to facilitate your delegation to someone else and so ultimately the tag doesn't matter in a sense, because you can go in there if you say, well, this is tagged as an economic thing, but I think it's a cybersecurity thing, and so I'm just going to change my delegation. It automatically delegated to the person that I had set up for economics, but I'm going to switch it to my cybersecurity person. And so so I think that ultimately is how that would work.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I think let's take this kind of up a level of abstraction here, because I think, and talk about just a little bit about hierarchies. So most of the world's organizations are governed by hierarchies.
Yeah.
I guess we're all well aware. And I'm curious, based on your own experience and study, kind of how do you feel about hierarchies and hierarchical governance?
Yeah. So I didn't mention this, but I grew up in a big family, and we're very close, and we do a lot of things together. We make a lot of decisions together. And I was involved in student councils, and like at Bastyr University, my school, I was on the student council for years, and then I was part of the New York Association of Naturopathic Physicians, and working with the legislature and all kinds of stuff there in New York. And so I've been kind of involved in this decision-making groups, and I've and as an owner of businesses, and I've had managers, and so there's this hierarchical process there, and I think like overall, I think we've been doing hierarchies for a really long time, and that we're sort of better than we could be at it. I suppose they seem to work, but by and large, but there are these sort of emerging properties of these really rigid hierarchies where there are problems that really do emerge, and sort of myopia problems where the broader set of problems are not considered, so externalities are not considered, and the full range of possible solutions are not considered, and it's sort of difficult. It's like cognitively expensive to broaden up these problem solving for for groups. So, and we just haven't had the tools. So I think hierarchies are kind of the best we can do, like unnatural hierarchies, like rigid hierarchies. But natural hierarchies, I think, are also really good. If you look at the difference between like bonobos and panotroglodytes, regular chimps, like there are hierarchies in both of them, but one is based on, because I'll kill you if you don't listen to me, and the other is sort of based on like more like respect and influence. So it's like, I think ultimately the best kind of hierarchies are natural hierarchies that emerge out of merit, that emerge out of people's respect for another person's expertise and insight regarding a specific, domain of topics. So I think it is important for us to have these sort of natural hierarchies, because we just can't all solve all the problems ourselves. It's like reinventing the wheel with every single problem. It's just a matter of how do we facilitate the empowerment of natural hierarchies. And so think of liquid democracy as a way of like easily identifying and fluidly like experimenting with how we're going to set up our hierarchies, and empowering people and kind of letting them try it for a little while and see how it goes, and like, oh, well, I thought he was going to be better, I thought he was going to come up with better solutions. So, and the group we are working with, the Flowback group, is pioneering this idea of predictive liquid democracy. So basically, when a decision is made, people can make predictions about what the outcome will be. Well, if you buy this type of car, it's actually going to end up costing this much with, maintenance and blah, blah, blah. And, when you're going to have to do this and that and whatever. So and they place these predictions, then it's like, I told you so, kind of results like, 5 years later, or whenever that prediction comes in 5 years, the actual cost will be this. And so you get kind of credits. You get like a gold star basically in that area of expertise. And so that's another way of helping you find people to delegate to ultimately. But and we will have that function as well. So that's another interesting thing.
That's really cool. So I want to kind of do a little kind of applied experiment right now, and use Quorum 1 potentially as a test case. So because you're talking a lot about meritocracy, right? This idea of governance by merit, ultimately.
Yeah.
Right. And I think meritocracy has been tossed around certain circles for a really long time. And oftentimes there's not a lot to back that up, right? It's like, oh, we're a meritocracy. And usually what that, will mean within startups and stuff is that like, it's just the founder kind of runs everything or whatever. Right. So I'm curious how, so using Quorum 1 as an example for a moment, we aim to have a few different key measurable aspects of membership which fit into our collaboration and governance processes. I'm wondering if we could just do a quick bit of rapid fire and kind of walk through how you would go about measuring each one of these, and whether you even think this is a good one to build it on, because I've seen you hit on a couple of these. And so I think the first one is just this idea of trust. Like how this idea of having a trust score, having how trusted you are fit in to governance. Like how do you see that as a measure, and what are some practical ways where you might go about actually like producing a measure of trust?
Yeah, again, it's so difficult, and there are people trying to tackle this problem also, like this trust network problem. And I'll tell you kind of where we're at with it. It's ultimately coming down to like looking at who is delegating to who. So so like let's say you're a business and you want to you need somebody who's going to make more decisions about your digital marketing presence, your copy, and your the look and feel of your media or whatever it is. And so you could just hire somebody, right? Just like, oh, this guy comes really highly rated on Upwork. Okay, well, that's like that's a trust score, right? Like people have said, wow, this really worked for me. We also have a plan for a similar system, which is that whenever a task is completed, it gets sort of rated on a number of measures like timeliness and cost effectiveness and integrity. I can't even remember. I haven't looked at it in a while, but we've worked this. We kind of developed some of this, and so you have, and then the domain itself. Like this person was empowered to, like do problem solve in a certain specific area, or like manage this set of tasks, and they managed the task well. Like they did the project management really well, and they did it timely, and they did it with cost effective, and they did it, so you start to build these like domains. Some of them are very broad, like general integrity, and some of them are very specific. And so you start to sort of build up like a score based on other people's experience of you. So that's one way we're looking at.
Yeah, that's cool. So I think that kind of hits at a question. So Stephen has been bringing forward some more questions
Mhm.
in the chat, and I think one of these kind of fits in, which is all around this idea of trust. And I think Stephen brings up a thing that has come up for us a lot in sort of like strategizing around quorum governance, which is this concept of decay.
Yeah.
Right. And this is where I think your traditional corporate governance as a product of majority rules voting based on number of shares being held, right? So whoever has the most stock, right, gets the most votes, kind of thing. And that's a classic example of a governance mechanism which doesn't really have any reasonable form of decay, right? You can like dilute people down the line, but it takes a lot of work and additional steps to make that happen. It's not built-in natural decay. And so I think, one part of merit and meritocracy is allowing for upward mobility. I'm kind of paraphrasing what Stefan's brought forward here, but another is allowing for kind of downward mobility.
Yeah.
And so the question is, do you have any systems or solutions, or have you come across any folks with systems or solutions allowing for more fluid movement in and out of positions in involved?
Yeah. So two ways. So one, I've really liked looking at what's the name of this group? There's I can't remember the name of it, but it's a DAO tooling system that does exactly this. So when you do some work, say, for example, you build some code and it gives you some, you get sort of score for doing this particular work. But then those points that you get decay over time. So unless you're sort of continually engaged in the process of development, eventually you will you'll sort of go out of date, I suppose. So there's that, and I like that idea. The core way that we manage it is that you can instantly change your vote, change your delegation at any time. So, like if you think of it like this, like imagine you've got a group of people who are making decisions about the company's marketing, and you decide that you need more marketing expertise and more work. There's a lot more work that you want to hire somebody, so you bring somebody in, and this person's like younger and fresher and whatever it is, and like people in the group start to see this person and they go, oh, I think this person might be more in touch with what's actually happening in the real world, the social media. And so they just say, well, let's delegate. I'm going to delegate the decisions regarding the marketing of our platform to this person. And so you start to see some people will make that decision, and so you'll just see a natural, and then they start to make decisions. Maybe they're making great decisions, and then their sort of power will rise. Maybe after a year or two, and they get married and or whatever, they stop caring or they're whatever, and they're putting less time in, and they're starting to make sort of half-assed decisions, and people are going, oh, okay, wait a minute, okay, who else? What are my other options here? Oh, what about that other guy I was voting for before? Like, he seems to be still pretty solid and he still cares, or she or whoever, so it's that fluid ability to kind of have your pulse on things. And then there's the discussions about that you might hear. The water cooler discussions can kind of happen in a more formalized way as well on ForBy. So yeah.
So we have somebody in the chat who appears to be a sparkling avocado is calling out. If you want to share your name, I can give you credit for your ideas. But is calling out, is Coordinate the name of the tool that you're thinking of?
It's not. I looked into that a little bit. It's not Aragon. It's not it's Colony. It's Colony. That's what I was looking at.
Colony. Yes. Coordinate is super cool. I think they run like bounty based things, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I will note that down for the notes. Cool. So, and then also Turquoise shares just a link to a book by Ted Rao, who's also kind of a friend of Quorum One, although we haven't pulled him in Quorum One just yet, called Who Decides? And she references the concept of epistocracy, or sort of like kind of governance structures that respect the nature of expertise. So just wanted to share that. I just wonder if you follow Sam much around kind of sociocracy or holacracy or any of those other corporate organizational governance frameworks, and kind of what your perspective is on them.
Yeah, I like them. They're great for smaller groups, and like definitely in the sub Dunbar sort of number, and we totally support it. Like just sort of almost accidentally, our platform absolutely supports the whole structure of sociocracy and holacracy. So, the idea of putting a group of people into empowerment, and where they can kind of make decisions on an area, domain of expertise, and then having sort of interlinking, communication cycles between different domains and including the large group. I think that's great. I've never experienced it myself, so I like the idea, but I don't have any direct experience. So, but it sort of makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to call out. I think very wise to call out the Dunbar number in terms of governance, right? And certain things that would work underneath this, right? The Dunbar number being kind of the maximum number of relationships that our brains are, theoretically able to keep track of, right?
Yeah.
Like a certain number of close friends, which I believe is like 5 to 10, and then acquaintances in the 50, and then the overall is like 150.
Yeah,
and,
correct. That's what I heard.
Once you get over a certain size, the human mind is just no longer able to keep track of that many relationships, and so certain things that will work underneath that just simply won't work above that scale.
Right. Right. And if you get crazy people into, you get really people who are, oppositional or defiant or whatever, or antisocial, whatever, into a sociocratic system, it can really throw wrenches in the works. So, so there's that.
How do you think of consensus in general, and just this idea of I noticed that a lot of, for me, one of my challenges with sociocracy, I draw a lot of inspiration from. I've been studying it for many years. Has influenced Core 1 structures heavily and stuff. I have a lot of respect for sociocracy. And at the same time, one of the issues I often run into is it really focuses on consensus.
Yeah.
A lot of like this idea of coming into consensus.
Yeah.
How do you think about consensus and the desirability or non-desirability of coming into consensus for group?
Yeah, so I think it's also a matter of scale. Like in smaller groups where you have a group of people that you sort of trust, or you believe. So the more trust, the smaller and the more trust a group has, the more fine-grained the decision-making tool can be. So, like for example, score voting, where you give something a score like from 1 to 100, or with us it's +5 to -5, like how much do you dislike it, and the score is really just like everybody's opinion on that added up, right? And so that's pretty fine-grained actually, and it allow that the problem with these fine-grained systems is that people who are willing to sacrifice relationships for personal gain, short-term personal gain, can, the more fine-grained the voting system, the more susceptible it is to strategic voting. So, so we've kind of done our best to give people the option to have like very fine-grained decision-making tools, that decision-making voting systems, but also in large public spaces, a system like combination of approval and ranked choice that will sort of minimize the effect of strategic voting, and still allow a lot of information to come through, and allow for really the best options to rise to the top. Because with the single choice voting, like the majority rule and that kind of thing, there's just not much information coming through. They're mathematically really poor. And so, so again, the more information, the more susceptible. But this Condorcet method is just sort of magical in its ability to allow really good decisions to come up. So score voting is better in more higher trust situations. So we kind of give people that choice.
Have you done any work around, kind of getting back at this idea of expertise, around the idea of weighting weighting voice based on expertise in a more kind of spectrum like way, not merely like, oh, let me look at comments and see who knows, is an expert in X, Y, or Z, but this idea of actually like incorporating the level of expertise in particular areas kind of directly and in a more mathematical way.
Yeah. I really like the idea, and we're hoping to have a pretty robust system for identifying expertise. So like a really third-party verifiable, so there's a couple ways this could be done. It could be done with like a third-party verification of your expertise, and that would give you, a factor of increase, 1x, 2x, 3x, whatever weight on your vote in that domain. It could also be done in a trust network. So people could go through like on LinkedIn and say, hey, this person's really good with this person's really good with that. I don't trust this person in this domain, et cetera. And so just the community's opinion of your area of expertise could be the basis of the vote increase of the refactoring of your vote. I mean, those are all doable, and these are the kind of experiments we need to run. I mean, we really need to figure out how to identify expertise and and in a fluid way, and identify trust and alignment, like ethical alignment, and so the simple version now is that we just have liquid delegation, and we consider that to be a proxy for trust and ethical alignment, and but there's a lot of ways that could be done, and really what we want to do is to enable some of those experiments to run, and then also the delegation itself. We want to allow people to develop their own delegation engines. So in other words, you could like automate it through an AI, for example, an AI that reads your writings and finds people that are in alignment in areas of expertise automatically for you, or that votes for you. You can just delegate to the AI and it knows what you want and it does all the voting for you. Or, there's a million ways to do it.
I would be remiss to not mention that, this area of peer-based skill mapping and verification is a key area we've been working on for a couple of years now within Quorum. So I think there's some potential areas for some of what Quorum's built, some of the support within building to kind of link into some process of that around kind of levels of sort of self-verification, peer-based verification, and then more paid formal expert verification maintained by a epistemic community, like maintaining those standards and practices in a kind of emergent way. So that whole flow, we're basically building an engine just for that piece. And it's a key part of it.
That's exciting. That's good. So is it in Django, hopefully? No, I'm just kidding. Probably doesn't matter too much.
It shouldn't matter too much. It should just something protocol based.
Yeah, exactly. API.
Could output verifiable credentials, W3C compatible verifiable credentials in a way where it could be very easily integrated into any other platform.
That's the kind of thing we're looking for. We're looking for these. We would like to ultimately be a platform where people could develop plugins and tools that would help them manage their delegation and their empowerment and all that kind of stuff, basically.
That's great. Let's bring maybe as kind of a last question, because we should wrap a few minutes before the top of the hour. But Turquoise Sound brings forward a question, which I think is a good one. Any thoughts on quadratic voting?
I'll give you my thoughts on it. I've seen some good, like surprisingly good uses of it. I can't remember the platform itself, but fundamentally, I don't think it solves any problems that score voting, rank choice voting, and approval voting don't solve. And I think, kind of the main use case is for token voting, where some people have a huge number of tokens, and it allows them to, it reduces it sort of blunts the effect of their outsized power to make decisions. I think that's the best use case of it. That's different from what other things can do. But in situations where it's more democratic, I would say the system of voting that we've developed, I think, is way more advanced. Yeah.
Yeah, right there with you on that. I'll add kind of my 2 cents in, whether anybody cares or not. But I think the issues with quadratic voting that I see are twofold. Obviously, it's like one mechanism that can solve problems in certain situations. I think all mechanisms are just tools in the toolbox that can be used and could be used in ways that are really beneficial. But two potential problems, particularly a lot of folks in the DAO space and Web3 space have been really gung ho about QV, right?
Well,
It's just like QV for everything. I think two big issues. One is it does not solve the problem of decay. Oftentimes it's used on top of token-based voting, and you still have the issue with, if a major venture capital firm owns 70% of your governance tokens, you can put as much QV on top of it as you want. That doesn't change the fact that you've statically linked, the quantity of tokens with, it's still the underlying math that's rooted in something that's static, and it doesn't solve that decay, and it doesn't solve the meritocratic aspect. It does get it a little bit of the fairness. And then the second thing is that it adds an extra layer of obfuscation. And I think particularly a lot of DAOs, one of the issues that they run into is democracy really struggles when there's not transparency, and when it's not easy for people to understand when this happens, then that happens. And so when you start to add extra layers of mathematic obfuscation on top of your governance processes, it gets really hard for people to track and make sense of, which defeats some of the purposes of democratic systems in the first place.
yeah. I mean, you're dealing with $1, one vote, more or less, like one token, one vote, or you're dealing with one person, one vote. And I think quadratic voting tries to kind of find a middle ground in some way between those two, but fundamentally you're dealing with a $1, one vote system. If you're trying to use like at its core, that's the system. So yeah.
And I think that idea of like one blank, one vote is just, it's kind of problematic. Like it's simple, it's easy to understand. Like one member, one vote. Yay! It feels
right. And I don't know how much time we have here, but like one of the models that we're looking at, and it'll probably end up being the governance model for ForBy itself, which is that there are different sort of governance sectors, and like for example, shareholders, investors. And so the investors will have a certain percentage of the governance pie, right? But then there's also the users who will get a certain percentage, and the like a board of directors who are people who are dedicated to the vision and democratic principles and the impact on society and stuff like that would get another slice. And furthermore, like those slices could float dynamically based on the how well the platform is doing. So like if ForBy is kind of running into financial issues, then the investor share kind of widens out, and people who are trying to make decisions to make a dollar or keep this thing afloat would become more empowered. Whereas when ForBy is doing really well, then perhaps the visionaries would have a little more.
I love that. Well, I think we can keep going for another hour or two, and it would be really riveting. I know, like reading through the chat thread, a lot of folks have been bringing for their appreciation for you and your experience and taking the time to have this discussion. And I think we should probably queue up another one of these to happen in a month or so.
Fun stuff
to keep it going.
And
let's maybe wrap this here. Unless you have any last comments.
There's so many ways this could go, but I just appreciate you all. You're inviting me here, and it's like I just want to say that I think this is the problem that we need to solve. One of the things I love, the whole reason I'm in Quorum One is because I really, respect that how important answering that question is to Quorum One and to your in particular. So just great that you're doing that, and I'm happy to contribute in whatever way I can. And and for me, indeed, this is like the problem of our time, which is how do we coordinate, how do we make sense of the world and make decisions together at the scales that we're facing, the billions, and how do we even do it at the hundreds, at the 212, like we're the same monkeys either way, right? But there's some differences in the dynamics, but ultimately we're all trying to figure this out. So yeah. Thanks for
here. I love it. Well, thank you everyone for in the audience for participating. This recording will be shared soon, maybe later this week. And if you have any other questions, please bring them in the community channel over in Slack. But Thanks, y'all. Have a good rest of your day.